Welcome back to the Book Nook podcast. You know, where we take stacks of books, articles, anything you're curious about, really, and we try to pull out all the good stuff, like, think of it as your own Cliff's Notes, but, like, way more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to think of it as getting to the heart of the matter, connect the dots, highlight those aha moments, and hopefully leave you feeling, informed and not like overwhelmed.
Exactly. And for today's deep dive, we are tackling J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, which really got people talking back in 2016. Now, we've got a unique approach for you today. We're not just going to summarize the book. We're going to layer in excerpts from a C-SPAN interview with Vance himself. And then two contrasting book reviews, one that sings its praises and the other, well, not so much.
So think of it as a 360-degree view of Hillbilly Elegy. We're giving you the story, the context, and all the reactions it sparked.
Now, I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just say you haven't really lived until you've heard the story of how Vance's memoir dealt with a cow thief. But first, let's set the stage.
Yeah, so the story unfolds in two key locations, Middletown, Ohio, and Jackson, Kentucky.
Okay, so Middletown is where Vance spent most of his childhood. It was a struggling steel town. But still, families like his saw it as a step up from even deeper poverty in Appalachia.
And Jackson, Kentucky, that's Vance's ancestral home, and that's where we see that rural poverty in full effect. High unemployment, the opioid epidemic hitting hard. It paints a stark picture of all the challenges facing this community.
And against this backdrop, we meet Vance's family. To put it mildly, they are a turbulent bunch, a revolving door of stepfathers, his mom battling addiction. It's definitely a recipe for instability.
But in the midst of all that chaos, you have Mama and Papa. These two are like larger-than-life characters, strong, opinionated, flawed, but always there for Vance. They really embody that mix of resilience and dysfunction that the book explores.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the big ideas that run through Hillbilly Elegy. One that really jumped out at me was the concept of learned helplessness.
So Vance argues that after generations of hardship, many in this community develop a sense of powerlessness, like they're trapped by circumstance. Any effort to change is futile, and this leads to a deep cynicism and a lack of agency, that feeling that they have no control over their own lives.
Right, and that ties into another theme, gaming the system. Vance uses the example of food stamps to illustrate this.
He saw people who genuinely needed help, but also witnessed others exploiting the system. And this created a sense of resentment, both towards those gaming it and the government itself.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with no easy answers. But one thing that's clear is the fierce loyalty to family, almost like a tribal sense of honor that permeates this culture.
Oh yeah, remember that story about the chicken man? Mama going ballistic over those effing zoning laws? It shows just how fiercely they protect their own, even if their actions clash with the outside world's norms.
And sometimes that protectiveness takes a dark turn. Vance doesn't shy away from the violence that was a part of his family life.
Oh, for sure. The story of Mama setting Papa on fire because he came home drunk is shocking. But it reveals how violence became almost normalized within their culture. It was a way to exert control, to defend their own. A stark reminder that this memoir doesn't romanticize poverty.
Absolutely. It's a brutally honest portrayal. And another element of that honesty is how Vance grapples with religion. This region is deeply religious, but
church attendance is declining, and Vance sees this as a loss of community support, a safety net that's fraying, especially for those battling addiction or personal crises.
It raises the question, what fills that void when those traditional support systems weaken?
Right. And speaking of challenging transitions, Vance's journey toward education and upward mobility brought its own set of obstacles. Early on, he struggled to see the point of school.
Yeah, surrounded by people who hadn't made it despite their education. It's easy to see why he felt that way. But Vance ultimately thrived, excelling at Ohio State and then going on to Yale Law School.
It's an incredible achievement. But that success created a new set of struggles. He talks about feeling like a class traitor, like he was leaving his community behind.
Yeah, that internal conflict is something many people who climb the socioeconomic ladder can relate to. The pull of your roots can be incredibly strong. And if you're enjoying our deep dive so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It helps other bookworms find the Book Nook podcast. Now, back to Hillbilly Elegy. Before we unpack the reactions to the book, let's talk about the way Vance's experiences in the Marines, particularly his deployment to Iraq, transformed his perspective.
Okay, Vance recounts this pivotal moment during his time in Iraq. He calls it the eraser story. Witnessing the utter devastation and poverty of a war-torn nation shifted his perspective. It made him appreciate his own life in a whole new light.
So he describes a profound shift from resentment to gratitude. Like, despite the hardships he'd faced, he realized he'd been given opportunities many could only dream of.
It's a powerful example of how exposure to different realities can reshape our understanding of our own experiences.
Right, and that shift stays with him even after he returns home. It seems to have allowed him to view his past and his family with more empathy, less judgment.
Absolutely. And throughout Hillbilly Elegy, Vance uses these vivid anecdotes and quotes that really bring his story to life. For instance, he talks about how even the most cutting insults were tolerated within his family, as long as they came from within the family circle.
It's like they had their own code of conduct,
Yeah.
a fiercely protective bubble. He quotes Mama saying, "Nobody can call you a hillbilly except for us. And when we say it, it's okay."
Exactly. Outsiders might perceive their behavior as rough or even dysfunctional, but there's this deep-seated sense of loyalty, a protectiveness that binds them together.
And it reminds me of another quote, where Vance talks about Mama's reaction to the government interfering with the chicken man. He says, "My sister and I still call the old mail carrier the chicken man." And years later, even mention of how the city government ganged up on the chicken man could inspire Mama's trademark vitriol. Effing zoning laws. They can kiss my ruby red, you know what?
That quote perfectly encapsulates their defiance of authority, that suspicion of anyone trying to impose rules on their way of life. It speaks to a sense of independence, but also a potential for conflict with broader societal norms.
It's like they have their own system of justice, their own way of handling things. Vance calls it hillbilly justice.
And he recounts stories that illustrate this mentality, like the time someone tried to steal the family's cow. And his mama, at just 12 years old, shot one of the thieves and almost finished him off right there.
Talk about taking the law into your own hands. It's a world where violence is often seen as a solution, a way to protect what's yours or right, a perceived wrong. It's both unsettling and, in a strange way, understandable given the context of their lives.
And it speaks to the cycle of trauma that Vance explores. His grandparents experienced violence in their own lives, and those patterns were passed down through generations. It makes you wonder how you break free from such deeply ingrained behaviors.
It's a question Vance grapples with throughout the book. He even admits that despite achieving success, he still feels that pull towards his hillbilly roots. He recounts a story where someone asked him at a gas station if he went to Yale, and he lied, saying his girlfriend did. He felt like acknowledging his elite education would betray his background, like he'd become a class traitor.
That internal conflict is so revealing. It shows that even when you achieve upward mobility, that sense of belonging, those ingrained values, can stay with you, creating a tension between who you were and who you've become.
It makes you wonder, can you ever truly leave your past behind? Or is it always a part of who you are, even if you try to distance yourself from it?
It's a question that lingers long after you finish Hillbilly Elegy, and it's something that Vance himself continues to grapple with even after achieving success and entering the political arena.
Now, speaking of reactions, let's shift gears and explore the diverse responses that Hillbilly Elegy provoked. Jennifer Senior, in her New York Times review, praised the book for its compassionate lens.
Okay. She called it a civilized reference guide for an uncivilized election, highlighting its relevance to the political landscape of 2016. Remember, this was right around the time Donald Trump was elected.
Right. Senior felt that Vance offered valuable insights into a demographic often ignored by mainstream media, helping to explain the rise of Trump's appeal among the white working class.
But as with any impactful piece of writing, Hillbilly Elegy also drew its share of criticism. Piper Hansen, writing for the state press, argued that Vance lacked the authority to speak for the entire Appalachian region.
Okay. Hansen pointed out that Vance's personal experiences, while valid, couldn't be generalized to represent the diverse experiences of millions across Appalachia.
She also criticized the book for reinforcing negative stereotypes and for placing too much emphasis on personal responsibility, rather than acknowledging the systemic issues that contribute to poverty.
Hansen's critique raises a crucial question. Can we honestly depict a community's struggles without inadvertently perpetuating harmful stereotypes?
It's a delicate balance, and it's a conversation worth having. We need to be mindful of the potential for our narratives, even those rooted in personal experience, to reinforce existing biases.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive, let's touch on one more key aspect of Hillbilly Elegy, the way Vance masterfully weaves in those poignant quotes that capture the essence of his family and their culture.
Yes, like the one where he describes the family dynamic, saying, "You could make fun of your own blood, but God helped the outsider who did the same." It perfectly illustrates that fierce loyalty and protectiveness within the family unit.
And who could forget Mama's declaration about handling trouble? If you want to win a fight, you've got to hit first and you've got to hit hard. It speaks to the ingrained belief in self-reliance and the tendency to resort to violence as a means of protection.
These quotes add so much depth and color to the story, giving us a glimpse into the values and mindset that shaped Vance's upbringing.
They really stick with you, don't they? And if you're finding these insights as fascinating as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It helps other book lovers find their way to the Book Nook podcast. So, as we've seen, Hillbilly Elegy is more than just a personal memoir. It's a social commentary that sparked a national conversation about class, culture, and the struggles of the white working class in America. It really touched a nerve and brought to light a community that's often overlooked.
And it raises some really tough questions that have no easy answers, like, can personal responsibility and structural inequality coexist as explanations for poverty?
Right. It's definitely a complex issue. Vance argues that while economic factors definitely play a role, there's also a cultural element that can't be ignored.
He points to that sense of learned helplessness we talked about, the distrust of institutions, the tendency towards self-destructive behaviors. He sees these as patterns that contribute to the cycle of poverty.
But then you have critics like Piper Hansen who argue that focusing solely on those cultural factors risks blaming the victims, that it ignores the systemic issues at play, like the lack of access to education, healthcare, and job opportunities.
It's a valid point, and the reality is it's not an either situation. Both forces are likely at work. It's this complex interplay of individual choices, cultural norms, and structural barriers.
And we need to acknowledge all of those factors to truly understand and address the challenges faced by communities like the one Vance depicts.
Absolutely, and it's a conversation that's incredibly relevant today. Hillbilly Elegy helped shed light on a demographic that felt ignored and left behind. And that sense of resentment and anger contributed to the rise of populism.
It's a reminder that even within a seemingly homogenous group, there's a diversity of thought and experience. Not all hillbillies voted for Trump, and not all share Vance's views on personal responsibility.
Exactly. It's so important to avoid generalizations and to recognize the nuances within any community. Hillbilly Elegy offers one perspective, one man's journey. It shouldn't be mistaken as the definitive story of an entire region.
Right, it's a starting point for a much larger conversation, and it challenges us to look beyond stereotypes and engage with empathy and understanding, to really listen to the stories of those who feel unheard, and to acknowledge their struggles.
And ultimately, to work towards solutions that address both the cultural and structural factors, contributing to poverty and inequality.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Hillbilly Elegy, we want to leave you with this. Read the book for yourself. It's a raw, honest, and ultimately thought-provoking memoir that offers a glimpse into a world often overlooked. And if you enjoyed our breakdown, be sure to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast and leave us a review. We love hearing from fellow bookworms.
You can find a link to purchase Hillbilly Elegy in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on the Book Nook podcast.